At the beginning of this year, we started on the first Sunday of each month covering a song. And I want to continue in that tradition tonight. Singing is one of the most powerful, emotion-invoking moments in our worship period. Songs, we've looked at how they change our hearts and change our minds, how they spur us and prod us to bigger and better and greater things in our own lives. And the song that I've chosen tonight is one of those. I remember years ago when I first became a Christian. We had several song leaders there in the church at Caddo. One was my shop teacher from high school, my wood shop teacher, Kenny Owens, and I think he still leads singing. And another one was Julie's own grandpa would get up and sing at times, Horace Mitchell. Always liked how at the beginning of worship on Sunday mornings he would sit right down here in the front, and when he thought it was time to go, or whenever the clock struck the hour and people were still milling about, he would start off with a song, and he would lead it from right there, sitting right there in that front pew. And by the time he finished the first verse, everyone was seated and ready for worship to begin. Another one of our song leaders was a man by the name of Don Aller, a great and godly man, and also happened to be my football coach in high school. And he's still a great song leader and a great man. And he is the first one I ever heard lead the song that we're doing tonight. You never mentioned him to me. It is one of the most heartbreaking songs, I believe, in our hymnals. Most of our songs that are heartbreaking have to do with the cross and the sacrifice of Jesus and what he gave up. But we always know that there's this overcoming of the death, right? The resurrection itself. And so we know even in singing those songs, the morbidity of the or moroseness, maybe I should say, of those moments are somewhat balanced by the triumph over the tomb. But when we come to You Never Mentioned Him to Me, it's about an indictment oftentimes against ourselves. The song was written by a guy named James Rowe. He was born in 1866 in England. He worked in England for a while, but at the age of 24 in 1890, he moved to the United States of America. Shortly after that, he became a president of a humane society in the Northeast. And around that time, about 1896, he began writing hymns. He has around 9,000 hymns and poems and recitations that he has written that have been published, mind you. So a very prolific writer. And yet we have a few of his songs in our songbook. And probably this is one that we at least are familiar with, if for no other reason, for the message of the song. This hymn appeared for the first time in a hymn book in the early 1900s. There was a Methodist hymn book about 1935 that contains this particular song. He does have a Methodist background himself, and so it would go to, it would be natural for it to show up first in a Methodist hymnal. The point of the hymn, when we think about, why is this song written? Some friends of mine that are not fond of this hymn, they say that the song was written to make a guilt trip and just makes us feel bad about our personal evangelism. And maybe that's true, but I don't think that's why James actually wrote this particular song. I think Mr. Rowe wrote it because it is meant to spur us to action and to rally us around the banner of Christ as his mouthpieces on this earth, that personal evangelism is an important aspect of our Christian living. And through the years that we've been together, that personal evangelism is something that is important to all of us. The things that we do, and that most of us, we look at our lives and take assessment at some point, and we say, I know I should be doing more, right? We've said that. Most of us have at least said that about ourselves. I know I should be doing more. And I think what we mean by that is one of the things we need to be doing more is speaking the truth or telling others about Christ. And so the song depicts the the future judgment day and the sad moment that someone may maybe see us across the crowded bar room of God, or the courtroom of God, and they see us and recognize us from our time on earth, and as they are being sentenced to an eternity in hell, they see us on the right-hand side with the sheep, as it were, and they call out, you never mentioned him to me. And just to think about those words spoken to us who are striving to be Christians, who, I think as we said last Sunday morning, we have the greatest story ever told. We have the hope of humanity. We have the message of salvation. And then to hold that in and to allow those who are lost to remain lost without saying a word, trying to turn them back to Christ. Now, as we come to the hymn itself, I think there's a certain amount of poetic license that we have to make. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that when it comes to poetry, we have to allow a certain amount of leeway for the theology to be correct. And we see it in the very first line, when in the better land before the bar we stand. And so we think about, what is the better land? What land are we looking forward to that is better than the land we're in now? And I think our first inclination would be heaven, right? Heaven is that better land. Except, he tells us in the second stanza, and we'll look at it real quick here, if anyone lost one there should cry in deep despair. How many lost people will be in heaven? And so instead of saying that the better land is heaven, I think we have some indication here that the better land is actually talking about the bar. And so to understand really this first line, the bar, like if you're going to become an attorney at law, you have to take the bar exam. And the idea of the bar here is not a drinking bar. This is the legal bar. It is the bench of the judge. And so when we stand before the judgment bar or the judgment bench of God, and God is on his throne and he is giving that judgment to humanity, to each individual about how they've lived their lives and so forth, when in the better land before the bar, he's talking about, I believe, or he has to be talking about, the judgment day. Not heaven itself, but the judgment day. And he says, how deeply our souls, or deeply grieved our souls will be. This is another indication of that, because grief is not found in heaven. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. I believe this picture from Revelation 21, beginning in verse 3 and 4, is a depiction of the end times, of what is happening after death and after judgment, that God is there with his people. This is not a picture of God with those who are separated from him in hell, which will be seen later in Revelation 21. This is his people. And he says what? He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And so there's this depiction of God who is tender and merciful, and he is wiping the tears that we might cry, any grief that we might have. And he goes on to say that there will be no more death, neither will there be mourning or crying or pain. All of those things will be done away. Someone once said it this way, that the glory of heaven is so great that we won't have time to think about the terrors of this earth. That goes along with what Paul would say in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 too, or chapter 4, verse 16, that this momentary light affliction is not worthy to be compared to that which awaits us. I think that's 2 Corinthians 6:17. I think I had it right the first time. And so this is a picture of the judgment day, And though I'm not certain about what the judgment day will look like, I think that we get a fairly good picture in Matthew chapter 25, beginning in about verse 31, where the picture is that the judgment scene has come. All nations are standing before God, and there's this separation between the goats and the sheep. The goats are those who are lost, are on his left hand, and the sheep are those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. They're on his right hand. And he says to those on his right hand, he says, come and inherit the kingdom which your Father has prepared for you, or my Father has prepared for you. For when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was sick and in prison, you have visited me. And the people on the right hand, not in false modesty, but not understanding what he's talking about, say, Lord, when did we ever do that for you? And he says, inasmuch as you've done it for one of the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. And so there's this separation of the judgment scene of those who are his people. Their names are written in the Lamb's book of life, and they're hearing their reward. Come and receive your inheritance because you lived as Christians. Then he says to those on his left hand, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. For when I was sick, or when I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me anything to drink. When I was naked, you didn't clothe me. When I was sick and in prison, you didn't come visit me. And they're just as baffled. Lord, when at any time did we see you like that? Inasmuch as you have not done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, you've not done it unto me. Are all the people seeing this? Are all the sheep on the right hand seeing and listening to those on the left hand be condemned? Or those on the left hand, are they able to see the reward of those on the right hand? It appears that way in this passage. And if that's the case, imagine if you're gathered with the sheep on one side and you look across the aisle and you see over there your neighbor or your boss or one of your old friends. And they look across the aisle at you, and imagine your eyes meet in that moment. And as the sentence is being pronounced against them, they say, you never told me. How deeply grieved in that moment. I think even if this is somewhat of a fictitious account, maybe if that never actually happens, is it possible that someone that we saw every day didn't hear from us? And if it would pain us to look in their eyes on Judgment Day and know that we have not said a word to try to save them, why does it not pain us today, in this moment, that we would not speak those words? What would the grief be if any lost one there should cry in deep despair? Now, we have to understand the lost ones, they're not lost because of me. They're not lost because I didn't tell them. They're lost because of sin, right? We're told in Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14, that there are two ways. One is a wide and easy wide gate, an easy way that leads to eternal destruction. And Jesus says, many there will be that enter in there. But there is a narrow gate and a straightened way. Almost always feel obligated to spell the word straight there. It's not straight as in an arrow, S-T-R-A-I-G-H-T. It's S-T-R-A-I-T, straight. And it has the idea of peril, that it's difficult. So narrow is the gate and difficult is this way that leads to eternal life, and there are few that will find it. No matter how far or close you are to God at this moment, you are there by your choice. And so if any lost one there is lost, it is by their choice. Their separation from God is by their choice. Now, a lot of people are making the choice in ignorance. I'm not saying they're ignorant people, but they're ignorant about, they're ignoring the truth about God. And notice the word ignorant comes from the root ignore. If we ignore the message, we can't possibly know what it means to us, what it means for us. And so there are a lot of people who have chosen ignorantly because they have ignored the message of God up to this point. And so their lostness is a result of their choice to sin. Because really that's what being lost is all about. They're lost because of their sin, which is a result of their choice. And he says that the cry of the lost, that any should cry in deep despair. And as I read that line, I think about moments in human history where people may have been crying in despair, and I think of Noah building the ark. And God told him everything to do, how to build it, what shape to make it, and what size to make it, and what to make it out of. Told him what to fill it with, the animals, a pair of each kind, and so forth. And then he finally tells Noah in chapter 7 to get in the ark, and God shut him in, and it says that the rains began to fall. Now, Genesis, in the account there, it's almost bland. The rains began to fall, and everything that moved upon the face of the earth, the birds, the beasts, the creeping things, and mankind died, perished. I think it's interesting, however, how Matthew 24, 37, and 38 describes how in the days of Noah, people were going about their daily business. They acted like it was any other day, because for them, they had ignored the pleas of Noah while the ark was preparing. And so they were going about their day. I mean, we're talking people of the earth. Do you suppose there might have been a wedding that day? And a husband and wife were standing at the altar, pledging their mutual admiration and love toward one another and a desire to be together for the rest of their lives, not knowing that their lives would end by the end of the day? Do you think that there were people who were going to work as they would normally go, or plowing in the field, or harvesting grapes, or whatever it might have been at that time of the year, expecting to enjoy the fruits of their labor, not knowing that would be their last moments on the earth? It appears that no rain had ever come by the time Noah came around, that the earth was somehow watered by a vapor that went up from the earth. But imagine being about your daily routine and water falls from the sky for the very first time. And if any had mocked Noah for building this large box, and as the waters began to rise, it says that it lifted the ark. Were there any outside of the ark after God had closed the door? Let us in. Please, let us in. The Bible doesn't tell us that that's what happened. But I'd be hard-pressed to think that didn't happen at all. Or in Matthew chapter 25, the very next chapter over, this time beginning in verse 11, You know, the first parable in Matthew 25 is the parable of the 10 virgins, the 5 wise and the 5 foolish. And the 5 wise have enough oil for when the bridegroom comes, but the 5 foolish didn't bring any extra oil, and so their lamps are burning low. So they leave and go get more oil, and as they're gone, that's when the bridegroom comes, and they go into the festival and they shut the door. And then the 5 foolish ones who now have enough oil for their lamps, they come to the feast. And it says that they said, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you." Do you think that is a cry in deep despair? That sudden, ominous realization that I didn't make it? And of course, the cry is an indictment against us. You never mentioned him to me. And we might try to assuage the guilt or the shame that we might feel in that moment by saying, yes, but you're lost because of your sin. And that's true. But does that alleviate our obligation to say something? The second stanza then calls us to avoid that heart-rending moment by basically saying, get busy. That's it. There's work to be done. Oh, let us, he says, spread the word, right? That's evangelism. That's personal work. We're going to spread the word. This is what the world needs. We can talk about the things that politicians say the world needs. You know, better schools, better funded government, whatever they have as an answer. But let me tell you what the world really needs. Forget about all of that, all of the talk out of Washington or Moscow or wherever it is in the world. It doesn't matter unless they're saying what the world needs now is God. It's not their job to say it, so they probably never will. But you know whose job it is to say it? It's mine. As a Christian, it's my job. So let us spread the word. What word is that? Well, in 1 Corinthians 1, verses 18 through 21, it's the preaching of the cross. That those who perish, those who are dying, those who are lost, they call the preaching of the cross foolishness. But unto us who are saved, it is the power of God unto salvation. That's why Paul would say in Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation. This is it. This is what the world needs. So let's spread this word, this message about Jesus Christ, that you don't have to live in a life of sin. You don't have to try to overcome your sin yourself. In fact, you can't. That debt was paid by Jesus. All you have to do is come with hat in hand to a Lord who loves you and wants you and will receive you. Let's spread the word. Where? Wherever it may be heard. Is it possible that some will not hear the word? Absolutely. Acts 17, verse 32, now when they heard the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, we will hear you again about this. This is Paul on Mars Hill, or the Areopagus in Athens. He's told them, I see that you are superstitious, or some translations, you are religious, because I've seen your statues to all the gods, and I even saw a statue to the unknown God, the one you threw out there just in case you forgot anybody. And he's the catch-all statue. He said, I'm here to tell you about that God. Because all of these others, they're not gods. But there is one who is. And he tells them about it. And they're listening. They're eating it up. They're loving what he's saying until he says something about the resurrection from the dead. And in their reasoned minds, in their reasoned certainty, one does not live after he's died. And so they cut him off. We don't want to hear it. Are there people in places today that don't want to hear it? Yeah. What did Jesus say in those moments? Shake the dust. Go on. How will I know if the word will be heard in a certain place? Isn't that kind of the question here? We're going to spread the word wherever it may be heard. How will I know if it's heard? Well, we start right here. And if we're rejected, shake the dust. And we move on. Because someone will hear. And don't try to force feed the gospel to those that don't want to hear. Because the simple fact is today they may not want to hear, but tomorrow things change. And if you, in your aggression with the word, have cut off them from hearing what God's grace is, when things change, they may still not want to hear the word, but it could be that if you leave in a way that is amicable, all right, I appreciate you letting me know you don't want to hear. If things change, give me a holler and move on. And it may be things change the next day, the next week, the next decade. I don't know. And they may not come to you, but they may be open to somebody else. So if the gospel is not getting a fair hearing from someone, we would simply say move on. But they have to get that hearing because faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God, Romans 10:17. So we're going to spread this word wherever it may be heard, helping groping souls the light to see. And the idea of groping, I think groping implies this idea of darkness. We're feeling around in the unknown, not quite getting a hold of what we need. And we're going to show them light, right? So here's the groping, but we want them to see the light. So there's a connection there. Well, what James Rowe is talking about in the hymn and what we're singing about is a realization that there are people who are searching, right? I think I mentioned it last week also in John 4:35. Do not say there are 4 months and then comes the harvest, but lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white already unto harvest. There are people who are searching. The fields are ripe. They're ready for harvest. And we, as the laborers, must go into the field and we must reap the harvest that is before us. Going back to Mars Hill in Acts chapter 17, this time in verse 27, Paul says, He made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward Him and find Him. Yet He is actually not far from each of us. And so Paul talks about, and even mentions how your own poets have said this, that people are feeling their way, they're groping, they're seeking, because they know that it has to be something more than just what I'm doing today, more than just the here and the now. And as they're searching, we are there. We're there to help groping souls to see the light. What light? John 8:12. I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. See that contrast between the darkness and the light. We see it here in this song. Help the groping, those who are in darkness, trying to feel their way to just the light switch. If you've ever walked into a dark room, you're kind of feeling your way around, and then someone on the other side of the room turns on the light switch. How thankful are you that you don't have to do a Rob Petrie over the ottoman? You don't have to grope. It's there. The light is on. We see. And in the song, we're saying to one another as we sing this song, we're at the light switch. People are groping in the darkness, and we're standing at the light switch. Will you turn it on? That yonder, don't you love that word yonder? We get it twice in this particular song, but we get it in other songs too. Yonder It is a term of distance or placement, being something that is further away from us than what is nearby. That yonder none may say, "You showed me not the way. You never mentioned him to me." The song is talking about preventative maintenance, as it were. You want to prevent that scene at the judgment bar. You never mention him to me. The only way you can prevent that is to mention him to that person. And so, working now in personal evangelism is what avoids that catastrophic scene. The third stanza. When I came here, one of my mantra for personal evangelism is just say something. You've heard me say that many times. Just say something. Notice what the song says. A few sweet words may guide a lost one to his side. That's 1896 James Rowe's way of saying, just say something. What are sweet words? In Colossians 4 that we looked at pretty extensively last Sunday morning, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt. What's he talking about? He's talking about sweet words. I think it's Proverbs 15:1 about you win more flies with honey than vinegar. There can be a sweetness to our words. There can be a harshness too, right? We understand that. There can be harsh words spoken. And we need to be careful about those harsh words. We don't have to speak harsh words. We have the world's greatest message. So what holds us back from telling someone, I love you and God loves you? Someone who's struggling with life and it seems hard that row that they happen to be hoeing right now, God wants you and he'll help you. Not in an arrogant way, but God has a place for you. God sent his son for you. I know those words will lead to other words, and we'll get into deeper theology, but God can help you. God can save you, and he wants to do it. One of the things that sociologists tells us that a lot of people struggle with, have anxiety over, is that feeling of acceptance, that someone would want me. Who would want me? I mean, we look at our lives, many of us, and we see how much we come up short, and we think, who would want me? There are people who have a hard time making friends because they think they're not worthy to have friends. There are people who can't get along with others at work because they think nobody wants me. And yet we have a message that says, you have been wanted since the day you were born. God knows your name. God knows your tossings at night. Come and learn of a God who catches your every tear in his own bottle. For someone who's struggling with acceptance, are there any sweeter words than those? And so we're here as a guide. We can't make them drink the water. We can only bring the water to them. They have to do it. We're guiding them to his side. But if we won't say the words, if we can't get past their ignoring of the word of God, they will not end up at his side. Or to say, I don't have all the answers, but I know who does. Here he is. Or turn sad eyes on Calvary. Sad eyes are the tired eyes, the ones who are burdened under the taskmaster of sin itself, John 8 and verse 34. He said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin." You ever seen old pictures of slaves on the auction block? Their defeated look, their tired and haggard bodies. That's who we are under sin. Our neighbor who's under sin, that's who they are. That defeated, bedraggled person who's mastered by sin. And what if we can turn those sad eyes to Calvary? In Numbers chapter 21, beginning in verse 4, the people had rebelled against God, and God, it says in verse 6, sent fiery serpents among them, and if the serpent bit them, they died. And Moses makes a bronze serpent, a metal snake, and puts it at the end of a staff, and he holds it up. And in verse 9 it says, if anyone who was bitten by one of the fiery snakes would just look upon that brass serpent on the end of a staff, then they would be healed in that moment. If they would turn their eyes to that image. And then in John chapter 3, and 13 and 14, no one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. He will be lifted up on the cross. And all who are bitten by the fiery serpent of sin can find healing if they will just turn their sad eyes to Calvary. That's the promise. So work. There's a lot to be said in the Bible about working for salvation, and we're not saved by works and stuff like that. But notice, these works right here, this is not working for our salvation. It's working for theirs. It's getting busy and doing whatever we can to help them. As days go by, we're told in Ephesians that the days are evil. Redeem the time. Days are going by. That yonder, there's our word again, over there, in that place of judgment at the judgment bar, none may cry, you never mentioned him to me. And it gets into the chorus then. You never mentioned him to me. You help me not the light to see. We are here to help. We can't do it for someone, but we can help them. How do we do that? By letting our light shine. You help me not the light to see. How will people see the light of Christ? Well, they'll see it first in us. Jesus, I know, said in John 8:12, I am the light of the world. But in Matthew 5, verse 14, he says, you are the light of the world. He says in verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. We reflect the light of Christ to a world that does not know him. This is the reality. You met me day by day. There is a familiarity. And I do find it interesting that in the chorus, this is the part that keeps coming back to us. And it's a truly haunting refrain, right? We repeat it. You met me day by day, and you knew I was astray. You knew I didn't know God. You knew I wasn't a Christian. We meet lost people every day. And the fact is, we meet some of those lost people day after day after day after day. And we talk weather and football and food and cars and everything else under the sun, but we don't talk about the most important message there is. We do this all while we know that they are lost and that we have the message that can save them. You knew I was astray, yet you never mentioned him. Is it a guilt trip? If it is, it's one I need. A reminder every now and then of my obligation to those that I love and those that I meet. So it's a scene of the judgment, of a dire potential that is ahead of us. Will this happen on the judgment day? I don't know. I don't know that we're given enough information about the actual judgment scene to say this scene will replay for us in that moment. But even if it doesn't there, are we still meeting people day by day knowing that they're astray and holding to ourselves the message which can save them? I am God's message to those who are in my sphere. I influence some people none of you will influence. And you, each one of you, influences some people that I will never meet. We are their gospel. We are their message. And so let's speak those sweet words that yonder none may say, never mention him to me. I don't know what your needs are tonight. You may already be a Christian, but if you're not, obviously all things are ready for you to become a Christian. Maybe you are a Christian. Maybe you've been struggling with evangelism. Maybe you just, as we mentioned last week, the power of prayer and evangelism. Maybe you just need the prayers and the encouragement of the church to push, to prod, to encourage you to speak those sweet words. Will you seek out the church's help in those moments? Will you come forward while we stand and while we sing?